Hi, it's Leslie Zemeckis here with a rogue right for success. My guest is so funny, so smart. She's an incredible storyteller. She is Christine Lee, and I recently devoured her memoir, Tell Me Everything You Don't Remember. Look at all the stuff I remarked. It has been another book recommendation in my new column with the Montecito Journal. At 33, Christine had a stroke and lost her short-term memory. In the book, she relates how words literally saved her. She kept a notebook while she was in the hospital and wrote everything down as it happened. And because of that, years later, when she wrote this, she could remember the experience. Kirkus Reviews says the book is a fascinating exploration of personal identity from a writer whose body is thankfully no longer at war. Library Journal writes, this absolutely fascinating memoir will give readers a fresh appreciation for the skills we use daily, as well as increased empathy for those going through any kind of recovery. The memoir is heartfelt yet very funny. It is honest, it is raw, it is beautiful, and I am such a fan of Christine, her writing, and of her. She was super generous and popped onto my mentoring program to talk to the girls and give all her great writing advice. So before we have Christine in a fabulous headpiece with her writing tips, I want to share her book trailer with you. And see you next week for another fabulous author. Remember, stories matter. Yours, hers, his, ours.
I went out for errands, and it was at that point that everything went double and then flipped 90 degrees. Like telephone poles and electric poles were sticking out horizontal, and the ground was vertical. Things are just a swirl of colors. I couldn't figure out that the cans contained food. The labels looked like patterns. I just knew then that something was very wrong, at which point I began to drive home. And then I didn't know how to drive home. Every time I hit a stop sign, I would sit there and figure out if I was going to go left or right, and I was able to get closer and closer to my house. And then I knew I needed to call 911. I couldn't figure out the phone number for 911. I decided to pick up the phone and punch a bunch of numbers. And whoever picked up, I would tell that someone that something was wrong. And that's how I ended up calling my husband at the time. The random set of numbers I punched in were my husband's phone number. It wasn't until the doctor told me that I'd had a stroke that I looked down and realized I'd been A, reading a book, and B, that I'd been reading the same paragraph over and over again for the past 3 days. On December 31, 2006, I had a left thalamic stroke that left me with a 15-minute short-term memory. It left me unable to boil water, because I'd boil water and walk away, return to it, and wonder who on earth was boiling water. I found that I had completely changed, that my world had completely changed, that my abilities had completely changed. I was unable to speak, unable to remember. I just really wanted my words back. It was the one thing I lost, and it was the one thing I wanted back. So each day, I wrote a post, and I would just detail what happened each day. And I just really did it because I didn't want to forget the experience. Around this time, I wrote an essay for BuzzFeed, and it helped propel me forward. I was able to write this essay, which went viral, which blew my mind. I had the fortunate experience of gaining interest by agents and editors, and now we have this book that I wrote in the course of 12 months. So Tell Me Everything You Don't Remember. It's a personal account of what happened to me during my stroke and recovery. I always wondered, why I would write this story, and I thought, oh, it's just a story about me getting sick and me getting better. But then I realized in a larger context, it's a comeback story. Writing it felt like a dam bursting, like I'd been ready to tell this story, and something finally happened in my life. My life had fallen apart, and I was able to channel all my emotions into this narrative to understand what had happened. And I feel like my own epiphanies, my own realizations, my own sense of discovery, I hope will be communicated through what I've written down. Hi, I'm Christine Lee, and I'm the author of the memoir, Tell Me Everything You Don't Remember. So I'm here to bring you 3 tips on writing today. The first tip is going to be the fact that in every one of your narratives, whether it be fiction or memoir, you have to have a change in the main character. And in memoir, that means having a before you and an after you. And you have to be honest with this change and have it inform your narrative. And when you read it, the reader must see how the protagonist has changed. So, and my next tip is a craft level tip. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the author, narrator, and character. These 3 things are separate and yet one and the same. Kind of like the Holy Trinity. In this case, I'm talking about the Holy Trinity of onions, carrots, and celery. They're one, and yet they're separate. So the author is the person who wrote the book, the person on the byline of the story, on the cover of the novel or the memoir. The narrator is the person narrating the story. And in the context of memoir, it is the component of yourself telling the story. And then the character is the person living out the story on the page. So when I talk about how they're separate, it's important to not have them converge and become one. And an example of that is on CSI, where the characters are explaining luminol instead of being their really authentic, true selves. And so they're holding up a luminol bottle and then explaining luminol as they spray it, which nobody does in real life. And that character is serving, is explaining and jumping out of themselves. So those are some examples. And then lastly, a word on writer's block. So everyone has different tactics for dealing with writer's block, which means it happens a lot. But for me, over the years, I've discovered that writer's block is a result of tyranny. And for me, that happens when I'm being a tyrant to my characters and forcing them to do basically what I call unnatural acts. For instance, I might have been putting a character through lots of hardship, or narrating a memoir in which I don't really reflect on any points of joy. And they're just being really resistant to what I'm writing. And so that tells me maybe I need to balance their experiences on the page. And same thing with the story. Sometimes when it's a novel or a fiction story, the characters take on a life of their own and have their own story, and may detract from the story you initially intended to tell. So I have to listen to them and step away. That doesn't mean I stop writing, because a lot of times writer's block happens as a result of me being a tyrant to myself and burdening myself with huge expectations. So I do some low stakes writing. I used to blog. These days I also journal. This is my Leuchtturm journal, and I just, scribble away with, I put down B notes too, and it, doesn't really matter what I'm writing. Sometimes I'll take a tarot card, put it on there and use it as a writing prompt. And it just sort of brings me back to the joy of writing and low stakes writing, where I'm not writing for an audience, I'm not writing for the public, but truly to the essence of it. So it keeps me writing and keeps my momentum up. And I hope these three tips helped you. So first, that there's a before you and an after you. The author and narrator and character being different, the Holy Trinity, and being easy on yourself and your characters for writer's block.